Yeah, we have to create the table. We have to figure out what that table looks like, right? With the data types, as Rutil said, all the column names, any other tables and any other relationships that it had. So for example, a student would not only have, their student record, they're going to have their timetable, their grades, everything else. So we have to plan all of that stuff here, map out all those relationships. We basically need to build the structure of the database first before we can put anything in it. With a NoSQL database like MongoDB, we don't have to do any of that. All we have to do is create an empty database, and we can start saving data to it right away. We don't have to define any tables. We don't have to pick data types or column names. Whatever JSON object, whatever array of JSON we send, it'll save. And also, if we want to change it, coming back to Tiffany's point about it being flexible, with a relational database, if we suddenly want to add a new field, we have to go into the database, modify the database before we can save a record with that new piece of information. MongoDB, we don't have to. So if we have one account with username and password, and we suddenly want to add an account with username, password, and phone number, we just write that in our application code, and that will just get added automatically to the database. Okay, so these slides are up on Blackboard. So this was a response to the scaling problem. So the problem was that applications that were being used too heavily, they were just running out of storage, and they would slow down. And you'd have to go and then put another server online and pay for it when your application got a lot of traffic. So the idea was, well, how can we do this in a more flexible way? So when we have to change our data model, we have to do a lot of work in a relational database. So this is kind of where NoSQL came from. So some of the So in NoSQL, our data is stored as JSON. We've already looked at a bit of JSON last week. We'll work with it a lot today. So we don't have this notion of what are called tables and records. That's relational database speak. We still have similar objects in NoSQL, but instead of a record, we have what's called a document. So the document is simply an array of JSON with all that information. So rather than a student record in a student table, we might have a student document. And it'll have keys and values, right? Username and a value, password and a value, program and a value. And we also don't really have this notion of relationships. So we'll look at some examples. In a relational database, like say what's on Blackboard, you have a student record in the student table, and you have related records in the courses, in the programs, in the grades. In a NoSQL database, your entire student record would be in one JSON object, where it would be nested, all your grades, your schedule, everything. So we can easily scale that, modify it, increase the amount of data, and we don't need to go to a new server or add new hardware. So this is what an example might look like. So this is, if you think about in traditional database speak, we might call this a record. In NoSQL, this is considered a document. And you'll notice that inside, here's kind of our parent fields, but then inside of here we have a subfield called grades, and it has a nested array with all of that student's grades. So we no longer have to create primary keys, foreign keys, do joins, write complicated SQL queries to pull out a bunch of data. We just select that document. It gives us everything. So it's going to be fast. You'll notice here, what I'm highlighting, what does that represent? And how do you suppose that gets generated?
It looks like a hash or a hashed primary key.
Right, so automatically, MongoDB, whenever we insert a document, will automatically generate a unique field called _ID, and it gives it a data type of object ID. So we don't have to set that up. Here, if we're building a table in MySQL Oracle, you've got to manually create a primary key field. It's automatically done for you. So this is probably, was the first and is still the most popular. There are other NoSQL databases. MongoDB is used more than any other. Okay? You can use other ones. There's CouchDB, there's Firebase, there's a number of newer ones. The word Mongo comes from the word humongous, meaning very large. right? It's got Mongo in the middle. So that's where the name comes from, because it was designed to be big. So most cloud hosts like Azure, Heroku, Amazon DigitalOcean, they'll support MongoDB. And the reason it's called NoSQL is because we will not write any SQL commands in this class. So something like this, if we want to, in our node code, we want to find, select all of the documents from the posts collection with the title Mongo. That's what our code looks like. db.name of your collection. Our collection is kind of the equivalent of a table. It's just with no structure. And then we just pass in, we want a title with that value. So it's really fast from a developer point of view. It gets all of the SQL coding, all the joins, all of the relational database planning, ERD, it all goes out the window. We don't have to spend time doing any of that. We can just create the CAP application, start saving data. So we've already done this kind of setup. I've asked you to do it. So we'll look at how to run it locally. We'll do this in a minute. And you can see what the commands are. They're pretty simple. So here are our CRUD commands. Database, the name of our collection, .insert, and then we just insert some JSON. And here I can insert, notice in this instance, I only have 2 values, name and type. And in this instance, I have 3 values, name, type, and on sale. No problem. MongoDB will allow me to do this. Now, this is hard for some of you to get your head around because we spent last summer in relational database teaching you how to structure your databases really well. Think it through, plan it all, and structure it, right? But the reality is our data changes a lot. So this type of technology is a response to that. So that would be like doing an insert. This is how we do a query, .find, .update, find this document and set this value to this. Remove would be pretty simple. There's all we need to know to do CRUD with MongoDB. Find, remove, update, and insert. That's it. The other thing we're going to look at today, we'll come back to this in a bit, is there's an NPM package called Mongoose. And Mongoose will do the connecting and all of the moving back and forth of our JSON from our Node app in and out of our database. So Mongoose is an object document mapper. So this is a package we're going to add and we're going to want to use. Okay, so let's try and get this started and running. I'm going to do it both on my local machine as well as on EMLab, and you can use either one. So if you downloaded and installed MongoDB, there's a few different ways you can do it. Here's what I find is the easiest. So I'll go into my folder where I downloaded it. I think by default, it gets downloaded to program files and MongoDB. So if you can go into that directory on your machine, possible to run it from this location by setting an environment variable. I find that's kind of a pain. So here's what I do instead. So go into your MongoDB server. Are you guys still on version 3 or did you get something newer? 3.4. Okay, I should probably update mine. That's okay. So I just keep going. Eventually I get to the bin. So MongoDB is self-contained. We can run it from any folder on our machine. Doesn't have to be installed anywhere in particular. So all I'm going to do, I'm going to copy all of these files. So just hit Control-A to select everything. And let's copy them. So there's your path. That's the deepest folder that we installed in the bin. Okay, everybody with me so far? Okay, so to make this simple, I'm going to go now into my folder where I'm running Node, which is C users R Freeman. I'm doing this because this is the default location in my command prompt, and we need to launch it from the command prompt, so I want it here. So inside of my Node folder, I'm going to create, I already have a MongoDB folder. So create a folder inside of your node called MongoDB. Just paste everything in here. It'll be easier to run from here. Well, whatever folder you've been using to store the work you've been doing in this class. If you've got a different folder, use that one. I just want it to be in a path that's easy for you to get to from your command prompt without you having to go through a million folders every time you want to launch this. So notice here are all my files. So we'll run the Mongo database server from here. Okay, so notice my path. I'm in users, my username, node MongoDB. If you're using a different path to be for your what you've been doing in class, that's fine. Put the MongoDB folder in whatever other folder you've been working with this class. Doesn't have to be the same path as mine. And now I'm going to go back to my main node folder. And there's two other folders we need to create. We need to create an empty folder called data. And in there, an empty folder called DB. You don't have to put anything in those. This is where when we run MongoDB, this is where it's going to create the database files. It looks for a directory called data/DB. So you can actually see here's some of the databases I've already created. You don't have to put anything in these folders. So one called data, and inside of data, you have another folder called DB. There's no files. There's nothing else that has to go in them. MongoDB will put a whole bunch of stuff in here when we start the server. So I've created MongoDB, and I've created data and DB inside. All this other stuff you see, once you start the server, it'll write a whole bunch of this stuff in here, like the journal and the database files. So let's actually launch the database server now. So let's open up command prompt. I'm in my users directory. So what I want to do is go into my node MongoDB folder. So this is where we copied all of the program files a minute ago, right? If I do dir, those are all the files we copied from the Mongo install. So there's a few different executables here. We're only interested in two of them. This one here, MongoD.exe, that's the actual server. So in order to get MongoDB running, we'll want to run that one, but we have to add some parameters. The other command in here we're going to want to use later is this one, mongo.exe. That allows us to write NoSQL queries in the command prompt. So to do an insert or a find with our command prompt. So I'm going to run this command, MongoD. So that's the server. And these instructions, they're in the PowerPoint I've put on Blackboard. And then we need --db path. And this is where we specify the path to our data folder that we just built. So we're telling MongoDB, this is where the databases should be created and stored in the data folder. If we don't specify this path and we don't have, it'll look for, just in our root C drive, it'll look for a folder called data. And if that folder doesn't exist, the server will crash, saying there is no data folder, so the server can't start. So MongoD --db path, and then a space, and then the path to your data folder that we just built. So I'm going to hit enter. We'll hopefully get our local server running. We'll try it. Okay, so now it tells me my server is running and waiting for connections. This is the default port for MongoDB. You can change it if you want. There's really no need to. 27017 is the port. So now my Mongo, I have an active server running on that port.
Can you please last step again?
It's this line right here. In fact, I think I have it in the slides, which you can open up on Blackboard. Here, the command's right here. In bold. MongoD -- db path C users, your username, node, and data. So I'm going to leave this command prompt active because if I close it, I've turned the server off and the database is offline. So in order for my local database to be accessible, we need to leave this command prompt running. So I'm going to just minimize that window. We'll just leave it running. I'm probably not going to shut it off till the end of class. So we've got a server. I have some databases on my server. Your server is running, but there's no databases in there. By default, it will actually create a database called test. So you can just start using that database, but we'll create a new one. So to actually run some commands on this database, we want to open up a second command prompt. Okay, so our server's running on port 27017. Leave it running. Open up another command prompt. And let's go back into node MongoDB. This time we just want to run the command Mongo. This allows us to connect to our local server and run commands. Okay. So notice here it says connecting to test. We didn't create a database called test. MongoDB builds that for you automatically. And notice down here, this command prompt now says connection accepted from 127.0.0.1 localhost. One connection's now open. So my server knows we've connected from this other window. Question?
MongoDB is not an internal or external command.
The command is MongoD, not MongoDB. Here's the command, MongoD. There's no B on the end of that command. So to create a new database, all we need to do is run a use command. So let's create a database. Yep. Is it running or not running? How many people are getting that error? Okay, are any of you on a Mac?
I'm running it in my Windows VM.
Okay, so it should be okay.
Sometimes they have to place in their path, they have to specify a string.
Yeah, is there a space in your folder path? No, no spaces? Okay. Google's our friend, so MongoD, sorry, read me the error again, please, Tiffany.
So server has startup warning. Warning access control is not enabled for the database.
Okay.
And
Okay, hang on, let's see. So,
I'm connected, but a few of us here got the same error.
let's see if we can. If you enable access control before creating a user, it provides an exception which allows you to create an admin user. So you get that when you run MongoDB, is that correct? When you try and start the server?
When I tried to start the server, it worked fine. It was only when we then did the Mongo second command.
Okay. So here's how to fix that if you're getting that error. I'll put this on Blackboard right now in lesson 5. Mongo. So there's a couple commands you can run that'll allow you to create a user, and then you can use that user. So that's down at the bottom of lesson 5. There's a link here to the MongoDB docs that explain the workaround for that error. So I want to create a new database. So I'm going to run a use command here, use COMP2068 winter 2017. You can just call yours COMP2068, doesn't matter. And I'm sure none of you are going to have to take this class ever again. So if you just have one COMP2068 database, you're fine. So I'll run a use command. And now it's created that database. With a relational database, if you run a use command on a database that doesn't exist, you're going to get an error saying the database doesn't exist. First, you have to run a create database command. MongoDB, we don't have to. We just created a new database and connected to it. So now we want to populate a few books in our database. So I've started this script. We said last week we took a vote. We were going to build a little kind of mini Amazon in this class. So we need to define, if we're going to insert a few books, we need a few samples, and we need to figure out what properties of a book we want to include in the database. So what title, what things should we have for a book if we want to save books? Okay, so we'll have a title. Okay, we'll have a title, we'll have an author. I'll update this in a minute and you can copy and paste it from Blackboard. Price. Okay, that's probably good. All right, so now we need to look up a few books. So, so let's see, 2015. You know what? I'm going to leave the publisher out just to keep it simpler. But maybe we could add the year as well. So we have a decimal field, so price and year. So I'll take this out for a minute. So if you refresh lesson 5 now, here's our insert command. We want to run at our Mongo command prompt to insert this document. Notice we don't have a books collection. Doesn't matter. MongoDB is just going to create one for us. So just copy that line off Blackboard. You may just have to refresh lesson 5 if you're not in there. So if we just right click and paste and hit enter, tells us that one document was inserted. If we want to check, we can run a query db.books.find, and then we'll call the pretty method, which will lay out each value on a new line. So that's what's in our books collection, one JSON document. So it's got the 4 values we inserted plus the auto-generated object ID, which we can use to uniquely identify that document. So that's cool. We saved a lot of time. We didn't have to figure out what the table's going to look like, figure out the data types, build it. We just threw a bunch of data into it.
Can we post the data types though? Like it's too easy to break the data now.
Yeah, so that's where this is going to come in. That's where Mongoose comes in. So what Mongoose allows us to do, and this is today we're really getting into the M part of the MVC pattern. Mongoose will allow us to create models or classes that define what a book is, what the data types are, and what the validation rules are. So for example, that price has to be greater than 0. The title is required. That year is required, must be a number greater than, you know, whatever number. So we'll use a Mongoose and we'll use our model, our class, to enforce those things. We'll also enforce them on our EJS files on the front end, right? We'll build a book form. We're not going to allow someone to type in ABC as the year. We're going to enforce validation on the front end, validation on the back end with Mongoose as well. Okay, so all that stuff is done kind of ahead of time. We don't have to enforce it in the database. It's done at our application level instead. Okay, I'm just going to edit this. So I'll just make a copy. And let's get a couple other books that somebody's reading. Anybody else reading a book right now? If so, what book is it? We can look up the price and the year.
Call the Wild.
Sorry, what'd you say?
Third circle theory. Third circle theory.
Third circle theory?
The what?
Third circle theory.
Oh, okay.
And you said Call of the Wild, Scott?
Yeah.
All right. Can you quickly look up the Amazon price, author, and year for those two books, and we'll add them in here?
$70.
70? Okay. Year and author? You don't have to. I'll update this on Blackboard. You can just copy and paste these in a minute.
The author, yeah.
Okay. And if you got a
The paperback price is $3.59.
okay, and the year of publication?
1990.
Okay, and what about the year and author for Third Circle Theory?
The author is Pageman, P-E-J-M-A-N.
E-E-J.
M-A-N. And the year is 2012.
Okay, that's probably a last name. Is there a first name?
Is the first name. The last name is G-H-A.
G-I-M-I.
B-I-M-I.
B-I-M-I? Is that right? Okay, so just refresh your page and let's copy, don't copy the first insert statement. We already have that document. So grab the other two. Let's copy those. Let's paste those as well and hit enter. It says inserted twice now, which is good. We should be able to run our query one more time, and now we should see all three documents. Whoops. So we want db.books. So now I've got three documents. Each one gets a unique object ID. So now we've got some data we can work with. Later on, we'll build a form so we can add new books from our Node application. For now, first thing we're going to want to do is be able to build a page that will actually display this data from our MongoDB. And notice our format, it's already formatted as JSON. In fact, it's even faster. Rather than JSON, the actual format is called BISON, B-S-O-N. Anybody have an idea what the B stands for?
Binary.
Yeah, so rather than storing it in plain text JSON, MongoDB stores our data in binary JSON. So just converts it down to ones and zeros, so it's even faster. So this is what any of our data, all our data is going to look like in here. So we've got it locally. What I want to do is also show you, if as we have an option, we could also connect to our EMLab databases we created, and we could put the same data in there. And then you can work with either one. You can work with the live cloud database on EMLab, or you can work on your local server, so long as you kick this process off and get your server running when you come to class. You can work locally. So let's do it on EMLab as well, then we'll take a break. Okay, and I know a few of you may need a bit of help. So I'll go to EMLab, log in. So you'll probably have a similar page, except your MongoDB deployment is going to be blank, right? You've created an account, but it's empty. So the first thing we want to do is create a new database. Now, in the first option here, it's asking you to pay for all these, but if you click on single node, because notice these are replicas, these are scaled on multiple servers. Well, we don't need that. So they charge us for that, but if we click single node, just one server, now they give us a sandbox account with 5 gigs of storage. Cool. So pick sandbox. And it doesn't matter if you use AWS, Google, or Azure. They'll all have this single node option. So pick single node. Give your database a name. I'll just call mine COMP2068. I'll use the same name. I'll click Create New. So you can call your database anything you like. So this just takes a minute, it's done already. So it's set up a blank database in the cloud. So it should show up in your deployments list in just a second, as soon as it's ready. So again, all I did was click Create New. I picked single node, I gave it a name, and I clicked the Create button at the bottom. That was it. Is it showing up? Is your database showing up in the panel here? So now we want to do a couple things. We need to create, when we're working locally, we don't need a username and password, except for those of you getting access control errors. So the other thing you can do if it's giving you, if you have trouble with it, you can also just use EMLab as well. So let's click on the database we just created. Now you'll notice a couple things here. If we want to connect from the command line, here's the command to do it. So we could run our inserts from our command line on MongoDB. This connection string, this is the connection string we're going to use in our Node application so that our web application can talk to the database. So we can just copy and paste that string a bit later. It also says the sandbox, there's no redundancy, so there's no real backup. So don't use this for a real live production site. This is for development only, basically, or learning. Okay. And the next warning says you need a database user. So locally, we can connect without a username and password. To EMLab, obviously, your database has got to have authentication. So what we want to do is click the Users tab and click Add a Database User. Now, I say this every semester, and every semester someone ignores me. If you ignore me and you forget your username and password, you owe me a coffee. In next class, you go, I can't get in my database because I didn't bother writing down my username and password. You're creating the credential, not me. So I can't help you if you don't remember your username and password. So here's what we do. And I'm going to put this on YouTube. You're going to see my password. Please don't monkey with my database. One student dumped a whole bunch of images in my database. I'm just using it for the class. It's okay, I got her back good. I found her photo and photoshopped it nicely for the rest of the class. So create a username and password. So I'll call mine maybe Winter 2017 DBA for database administrator. My password will be will not copy 17. It could well have been. Now, whenever you create a database and create a login, here's something you're going to do from now on in every class and every application. You're going to go into your little text editor. So DB name. Write down the DB name. I forgot my password already. Good thing I haven't saved it. Oh, will not copy. 17. Right? Every database I build, I have a file somewhere with those credentials. And that file is backed up. So if I ever lose my computer, I have access to all my databases. Okay? So please put your credentials in a file so that you have them. You're going to need them in order to connect to this database. So click create. So now I have a user account. Here's my server. So there's the server. So I'm going to put that information in my text file. Someone steals my laptop. I know how to get back into this database. Okay. So there's no collections, but we can either create a collection first. Actually, let's go here for a minute. So you can actually import from CSV, or you can export your JSON from here, which is kind of neat. I'll go to collections. I'll click add collection. So let's create an empty books collection here. So just click add collections, add collection, books, and click create. Okay. It says there are no documents in here. If I click on it, gives me this, and then it gives me the option to add a document. So now what I can do is just take my JSON from here. I don't need the insert command. I just need the JSON document itself. I'll copy the first one, paste it in, and then I'll say create and go back. Oh, it wants me to use double quotes rather than single quotes. Oh, it wants double quotes around everything. Okay. All the titles. Okay, all the keys and all the values, we put double quotes around all of them. No problem. So double quotes around all 4 keys and around all 4 values. We'll try one more time. Well, it said put it around all of them.
But mine works without numbers being quotes.
Okay. Well,
Slash only, you can remove the slash.
oh, I can remove the slash. Oh, whoops, right.
It needs to be.
We'll take the quotes out. We'll get it right sooner or later. So I have quotes around 6 of my values, and my 2 numbers have no quotes. We'll try again. And I took out the slash here. So now I have the document with a different object ID on MongoDB. We have our first book. Now I can add the other two documents the same way. I can also now access this MongoDB through my command prompt if I want. I'll show you how to do it. And we can do it either way. So you can either copy and paste and add the quotes into here to add those other two documents. I can also use my command prompt. So here it says, here's how to connect to this database from the command prompt. So I'll copy that. This is just an option. You don't have to do this. I'll paste it in, and I'll take out the DB user and DB password and put in my proper credentials. So it's -u, and then -p. I'm putting in my actual username and password. Yes, I am broadcasting this to YouTube. That's interesting. I'll try again. Don't think I need those angled brackets. If this doesn't work, well, I'll go back and finish it in the EMLab site anyway. I'll try it one more time. Let's see. So it's trying to connect. It's doing something when I put my username and password in the angled brackets, but hasn't come back yet. I won't wait too long. If it doesn't come out, I'll just go back and do this the way we added the first book. Okay. Doesn't seem to want to respond that way. It's fine. So I'll go back to my books collection. Again, I'll add a document. And I'll take the second and third books. Put my key names and string values in double quotes.
It's because of the version.
Pardon me?
It's because of the database version. You have 3 on your.
Yeah, mine is older. I'll take out that last one. So now I have my other two books. I think they're formatted properly. I'll try and run this command. So again, no quotes around the numbers, but double quotes around all the other values in my JSON objects. And I want to take out those round brackets and semicolons at the end. Oh, I think it's only going to let me do it one at a time. So I'll just cut that one.
You could do multiple, you just have to put it into an array.
Ah, okay. So now we've got the same 3 documents in our online database that we have in our local database. So we can use either of these. I'll build my application and I'll connect to both. I'll toggle it. We'll do it live, locally, and then we'll do it with EMLab as well. Okay. This is probably a good place for us to take a break. So let's take a 20-minute break here. We'll come back at 12:45. And what we're going to do is we're going to take our lesson 4 part 2 application. We used the express generator. We built some links. We had a nav bar. We're going to work with that, add a little formatting to it. And then we want to start to connect that application to our MongoDB so we can start to work with the book data in our node application. Okay, so that's what we'll do the last part of class. Let's take a break here.